The rain hadn't just been falling, it was hunting. Sheets of water lashed against the deserted street, every drop carrying with it a chill that felt far older than the storm itself. By the time I stumbled into the square, the lamps had long since burned out, leaving only the faint glow of lightning to sketch the outlines of a town that should not have been awake. The windows were dark, the doors bolted, yet I could feel eyes everywhere, as though the town itself leaned forward to watch me drown. That was when I saw the library. Its doors were carved from blackened oak, warped as though scorched by fire centuries ago. No sign marked it, no light flickered inside, and yet something about the heavy silence drew me closer. My boots splashed through puddles that reflected not the storm above, but flickering candlelight within. By the time I touched the handle, the world outside felt impossibly far away, as though the storm had been waiting to deliver me here. The door opened on its own. Inside, the air smelled of damp pages and candle wax. 100 shelves towered upward into shadows, stacked with books that bore no titles, only blank spines. And in the silence, from somewhere between the aisles, I heard it. A voice that was not quite a whisper, not quite a breath. Every reader must finish their book. The door shut behind me with a hollow sigh, sealing the storm outside as though it had never existed. I stood frozen, the weight of silence pressing against my ears until I could hear the frantic thud of my own pulse. Rows upon rows of shelves stretched before me, impossibly high, their wood dark with age and varnish. The books stacked there carried no titles, only blank spines that gleamed faintly in the dim light. I should have turned around. Every instinct screamed to leave, to push back through the door and find my way out of this forgotten town. Yet something about the air, thick with the scent of dust, ink, and melted wax, rooted me to the floor. A flicker of movement tugged at the corner of my vision. I spun, but the aisle stood empty, lined with shadows. The whisper I had heard a moment ago seemed to linger in the wood, clinging like smoke. I told myself it was just the storm, the exhaustion of travel, the way loneliness could play tricks on tired senses. Still, the words echoed through my mind with uncanny clarity. Every reader must finish their book. I took a hesitant step forward. The floorboards groaned softly, a sound too deliberate, too alive. Somewhere deeper inside, a candle guttered, throwing a brief pool of light across the spines of 100 unread volumes. I followed, unable to resist, my fingers brushing against the smooth, nameless books. Each one seemed to hum faintly, vibrating at the edge of perception, like a barely audible song. When I reached the end of the aisle, the library opened into a vast chamber, impossibly large for the small building I had entered. A circular table sat in the center, its surface scarred by centuries of use. Atop it rested a single book, thicker than a dictionary, bound in cracked leather the color of dried blood. No dust clung to it. No other object touched it. I felt drawn toward it like a moth circling flame. My hand lifted of its own accord and traced the cover. The moment my fingers brushed the leather, the air shifted. The candles brightened. A low creak echoed across the room, as though someone or something had just stepped closer behind me. I turned sharply. He was standing between the shelves. The man, or what looked like a man, was tall, his frame gaunt beneath a long, tattered coat the color of midnight. His skin was pale, stretched too tightly across sharp bones, and his eyes, God, his eyes, were sunken hollows, glimmering with something that wasn't quite light. When he spoke, his voice was the same I had heard before, both a whisper and a breath, ancient and intimate. Every reader must finish their book. I stumbled backward, my legs striking the table. I don't understand, I stammered. What is this place? Who are you? He tilted his head as though the questions themselves amused him. I am the librarian, he said softly, and this is where all stories come to rest. His gaze dropped to the book on the table. You have chosen yours. I didn't choose anything, I protested, though even as the words left my mouth, the lie curdled on my tongue. I had touched the book. I had felt the pull. The librarian's lips stretched in something too thin to be a smile. No one ever chooses. The story chooses them. I shook my head and backed away. I don't want this. I was just looking for shelter. The librarian moved then, gliding silently until he stood across the table from me. His presence filled the space, the air thickening with cold. He laid one skeletal hand upon the book, and its cover shuddered, splitting open like a mouth. Pages fluttered, though no wind touched them, settling finally on the first leaf. My breath caught when I saw the words written there. It was my name, not just my name. Details, events, pieces of my life inked in perfect, delicate handwriting. The first page told of my childhood, the small town I had grown up in, the loneliness that followed me into adulthood. The sentences marched onward, relentless, recounting things no one else could know. My knees weakened. This isn't possible, I whispered. The librarian leaned closer. It has already begun. I reached for the book, desperate to close it, to end whatever trick this was. But as soon as my fingers touched the page, the ink writhed. New words bled across the parchment, wet and black, spelling out actions I hadn't yet taken. He touched the book. His hand trembled. His breath caught in his throat. I yanked my hand back. My heart hammered wildly. The words faded, sinking into the page as though they had always been there. You see? The librarian's voice dripped like honey over broken glass. The story is alive, and now it is yours. I wanted to scream, to deny him, but my throat was too dry, my tongue heavy as stone. All I could do was whisper, "What happens if I don't read it?" The librarian's expression darkened, shadows thickening around his face. For the first time, I saw something flicker in his hollow eyes, a hunger, sharp and cruel. "Every reader must finish their book," he repeated, each word deliberate. "Those who do not remain unfinished." The silence that followed felt suffocating. I forced myself to step away from the table, inch by inch, never breaking his gaze. My hand groped behind me for the door, the way out, anything. But when my fingers found the handle and yanked it open, the storm was gone. The town was gone. Beyond the threshold stretched another aisle of the library, darker, deeper, lined with shelves that vanished into shadow. I slammed the door shut, my chest heaving. Panic clawed at my ribs. The librarian did not move, but I felt his eyes on me, patient, watchful. "You cannot leave until the story ends," he said simply. My breath came ragged. No, this isn't real." I pressed my palms to my face, trying to ground myself, but when I pulled them away, I nearly choked on my own scream. The table had changed. The book now lay open to a fresh page, and across it, in that same delicate script, new words had appeared. He slammed the door. He could not escape. He turned to face the truth, and beneath that, a line not yet complete, the ink dripping forward as though the pen hovered invisibly above it, waiting for my next action. He stepped toward. I stumbled back, my voice breaking. "Stop it! Stop writing!" But the words kept crawling forward, slow, inevitable, describing the very panic that rattled through me. I lunged forward, slamming my hands against the pages in an effort to smear them, to destroy them. The parchment absorbed the pressure, unyielding, the words digging deeper, darker. The librarian's whisper brushed my ear, though he stood across the table. "The story cannot be erased." I tore at the pages, ripping one free, but the sound was wrong, too wet, too alive. When I looked down, the torn sheet pulsed faintly, like skin. My stomach lurched. I dropped it, stumbling backward until I hit the shelves. The page writhed on the floor before curling in on itself, dissolving into dust that vanished between the floorboards. The book replaced the missing page instantly, whole again, as though it had never been torn. Something inside me broke then. A desperate sob clawed at my throat, and I slumped against the shelves, trembling. The librarian tilted his head, studying me with the curiosity of a scientist observing a specimen. "Why me?" I managed to croak. His gaze lingered, unblinking. "Because your story was unfinished. Because you entered my library. Because the book has chosen you." I wanted to protest, to fight, but exhaustion pressed down heavier than fear. My mind clawed for logic, for escape, for anything that might sever me from the nightmare. But the library around me breathed softly, the shadows stretching and curling like living things. And somewhere deep in the silence, I heard it, the faintest rustle of pages turning, though I had not moved the book. I closed my eyes and realized with bone-deep dread that the story was going to continue whether I wanted it to or not. Inside, the air smelled of damp pages and candle wax. 100 shelves towered upward into shadows, stacked with books that bore no titles, only blank spines. And in the silence, from somewhere between the aisles, I heard it. A voice that was not quite a whisper, not quite a breath. Every reader must finish their book. The shelves pressed against my back like the bars of a cage. And though I tried to steady my breathing, the rhythm of the library swallowed me whole. Somewhere above, high in the unseen rafters, a rope creaked as though something heavy swayed from it, unseen. I forced my gaze back to the table. The book lay open, patient, waiting. The half-formed sentence on its page seemed to glimmer faintly as though daring me to complete it with my next step. I shook my head violently. No, I won't play this game. My voice cracked against the silence, pathetic in its defiance. But the book pulsed once, an almost imperceptible throb, and the unfinished words bled forward anyway. He refused. He thought himself strong enough to deny it. My throat closed. The letters had my voice, my denial, pinned forever in black ink. The act of speaking had become fuel for the page. The librarian still hadn't moved. His hands rested lightly on the table's edge, long fingers tapping once, twice, like the ticking of a metronome. "It is not a game," he whispered. "It is the truth of you bled into story. Every thought is ink, every breath is a line. There is no refusing what you already are." Something in me snapped then. I pushed away from the shelves, barreling toward another door at the far side of the chamber. The air seemed heavier as I ran, like wading through unseen water, but I didn't stop. My fingers closed around the knob, yanked hard. The door opened onto another aisle. Not freedom, not the street. Just more shelves stretching endlessly, the smell of mildew and ink thicker here, choking. I staggered inside anyway, too panicked to turn back. My boots echoed against the warped floorboards. The air was cooler in this part of the library, lit only by a faint blue glow that seemed to seep from the books themselves. I pulled one at random, desperate, thinking maybe these volumes held answers. The cover shivered beneath my grip, the blank spine humming like a living throat. When I opened it, my breath caught. The pages weren't filled with my story this time. They held someone else's. I read quickly, scanning the neat handwriting. Margaret Thorne, born 1812. She sought shelter from the storm. She opened the wrong door. She never left. The words blurred. I flipped ahead, page after page, only to find the sentences marching relentlessly toward a final line. Her story remained unfinished. The rest of the book dissolved into blank sheets. Waiting. No, I whispered, clutching the volume tight. The idea of dozens, hundreds of lives, trapped here in nameless bindings, clawed through my mind. This library was a tomb, every shelf stacked with stolen fates. A soft voice drifted from between the aisles. "Not the librarians! Higher, thinner, trembling! Help me!" I froze, the book slipping from my hands. The sound came again, faint but certain, a plea hidden in the hush of pages. I followed it, unwilling, my feet dragging me toward the sound before I could convince myself otherwise. At the end of the aisle, I found her. A woman stood there, or what was left of one. Her skin was gray as ash, her hair falling in brittle strands across hollow cheeks. Her eyes burned faintly blue, reflecting the glow of the shelves. She clutched a book to her chest, her fingers fused with its cover as though the leather had grown into her flesh. "Please," she whispered again, lips cracking as they formed the word. "Finish it. For me." She extended the book slightly, but when I reached out, her hand yanked it back, her expression wild. "No, if I let it go, I'll vanish." "You must read. Only you can." "Please!" Her voice broke into a ragged sob. She sank to her knees, rocking, the book fused to her ribs like a parasite. I staggered backward, bile rising. The library didn't just trap souls, it devoured them, bound them to their unfinished volumes until they weren't people anymore. Just echoes. You see them now. The librarian's voice carried from behind me, though I hadn't heard his approach. I spun to find him at the aisle's mouth, his hollow eyes gleaming. "The unfinished." They linger, hoping some wandering reader will take pity. But pity changes nothing. I gestured helplessly to the woman, who still rocked and wept softly. "What happens if I finish her book?" The librarian tilted his head. "Then you carry the burden of her ending. One story more upon your shoulders. It is not freedom. Only wait." The woman's burning eyes fixed on me. Her mouth worked silently now, no sound emerging, only a desperate mimicry of the plea she had already made. I shook my head, stumbling past her, unable to take the book, unable to condemn myself to her chains. She wailed then a thin, broken cry and dissolved into dust, scattering across the floor before vanishing between the planks. The book fell where she had been kneeling, its cover already fading into the wood, as though it had never existed. I fell against the shelves, gasping, tears stinging my eyes. The librarian's shadow stretched over me. "Every reader must finish their book," he murmured again, inexorable as gravity. "But not every reader can." I wanted to scream at him, to demand why, but the weight of what I had just seen crushed the words in my throat. Instead, I slid down the shelf, curling against the floorboards, my body shaking with exhaustion. The librarian crouched beside me, his coat whispering against the wood. His face hovered inches from mine, too pale, too sharp. "Sleep," he said. The word coiled into my ears, heavy with command. "When you wake, the story will have turned another page." My eyelids dragged downward, resistance crumbling. The last thing I saw before darkness took me was the librarian's hand brushing the floor, his long fingers tracing invisible lines in the dust, like a pen scrawling words no eye should ever read. When I opened my eyes again, I was no longer in the aisle. I lay on a narrow cot in a small chamber lit by a single candle. The walls were lined with bookshelves again, though these held fewer volumes, stacked unevenly, their blank spines broken in places. On the small table beside the cot lay the blood-colored book, the one that bore my name. Its pages were open to where I had left them, the ink still fresh. Only now, new lines stretched across the sheet, written while I slept. He saw the unfinished. He could not save her. He closed his eyes and dreamed of escape. But the library never let go. I pressed a hand over my mouth, the scream clawing at my throat. The story was writing me even in my sleep. Every choice, every failure carved into permanence. And in the corner of the room, a chair creaked softly as the librarian settled into it, patient as a vulture. His hollow eyes gleamed in the candlelight, fixed on me as though he had never stopped watching. "You will read," he said. "You will finish." Inside, the air smelled of damp pages and candle wax. 100 shelves towered upward into shadows, stacked with books that bore no titles, only blank spines. And in the silence, from somewhere between the aisles, I heard it, a voice that was not quite a whisper, not quite a breath. Every reader must finish their book. The candle flickered, as though it had heard his words, shrinking low, stretching long, bowing toward the open book that lay like a wound beside me. I wanted to shove it away, to tear it apart, but my arms felt heavy, my body unmoored. Sleep still clung to my bones like cobwebs, sticky, numbing. The librarian didn't move. His stillness was worse than motion. It was the stillness of stone, of coffins, of things buried long ago. His eyes pinned me in place. Slowly, I turned my face toward the book. The fresh lines waited there, black as tar, gleaming wet. My breath caught when I saw the next sentence already forming across the paper, letter by letter, invisible ink becoming solid. He reached out his hand, and before I realized it, my hand was moving. My fingers lifted, hovering over the page as though pulled by invisible threads. I clenched my fist, fighting it, sweat slicking my palm. "No," I whispered. "I won't." The words on the page quivered, then faltered. For the first time, the line remained unfinished. The ink bled to a stop mid-word, the letters curling and dying, half-born. The librarian leaned forward slightly, and though his face was expressionless, I felt his interest sharpen. "So," he murmured, "you resist." I dragged my arm back against my chest. "If this story is mine, I don't have to follow it." Something like amusement cracked through his voice, though no smile touched his lips. You think choice exists in ink? You think stories bow to their subjects? Every book in these shelves is a cage of what was and what will be. And you... His long fingers brushed the air above my book, never touching, yet the pages fluttered in submission. You are already written. No. My throat tightened around the word. I stopped it. For a heartbeat, silence wrapped the chamber. Then a sound split it. Applause. Faint at first, like rain striking wood, then louder, echoing through the walls. I sat bolt upright, staring wildly around the room, but the librarian remained still. His hollow eyes bored into me, but he was not clapping. The sound came from the shelves themselves. The books trembled where they sat, their spines knocking against one another, covers flapping open and shut like jaws. Pages rustled in 100 whispering voices, their chorus growing into a terrible parody of applause. Others are watching, the librarian said softly, his voice nearly drowned by the rustling. They hunger for endings. They remember when once they resisted too, and they applaud your defiance before it dies. The book stilled all at once, the silence after their frenzy worse than the sound itself. My chest heaved. I pressed my hands over my ears, though nothing remained to block. Why me? I whispered again. What did I do to deserve this? The librarian's gaze sharpened, almost pitying, almost cruel. You entered the library. I didn't choose it, I said, though the memory betrayed me. The way I'd stepped toward the door, the pull of it, how natural it had felt to enter. You touched the handle, he replied. You let the story call you. The candle guttered lower, throwing monstrous shadows against the walls. I couldn't stay here. If I stayed, I would dissolve like the woman in the aisle, become nothing but ash and an unfinished book. I rose, legs trembling, and staggered to the door of the chamber. My fingers grazed the handle when his voice cut the air like a blade. You cannot leave without it. I looked back. The book still lay open, its pages gleaming faintly. No, I said, shaking my head. I won't carry it. Then it will carry you, he whispered. Before I could stop myself, my hand reached for the book, seizing it, the leather searing cold against my palm. A sharp ache stabbed through my chest, as if something had hooked itself inside me. I gasped, stumbling backward with the weight of it. The librarian's hollow eyes gleamed faintly, satisfied. Now you may walk. I yanked the door open and fled. The corridor beyond was not the same aisle I had seen before. This one bent in impossible angles, staircases climbing into shadows that bent sideways, ladders vanishing into ceilings that opened onto other rooms. The geometry of the library had shifted, growing more labyrinth than building. My breath echoed harshly, bouncing back in strange rhythms as though others were breathing with me. I walked quickly, gripping the book tight against me, every step feeding the terror that I was only walking deeper, not farther. The shelves seemed endless, the books watching me from their blank spines, vibrating faintly as I passed. Then, faintly, a sound. Footsteps. Not my own. I froze. The rhythm was uneven, dragging, slow. They came from around the corner of the aisle. I pressed myself against the shelves, my heartbeat thundering. The figure appeared, limping. A man, what remained of one, dressed in rags that might once have been a scholar's coat. His skin hung loose from his bones, his face hollow, yet his eyes burned with the same faint blue glow I had seen in the woman's. He clutched a book to his chest, fused with his ribs, flesh and leather melded. His lips moved ceaselessly, whispering the words of his story over and over. Like a prayer he couldn't stop. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't notice me. But the instant I thought it, the words appeared across the page of the book I held. He prayed to go unseen. He failed. The man's head snapped toward me, eyes wild, mouth stretching into a scream that tore through the silence. I ran. His footsteps staggered after me, fast despite the limp, the whisper of his fused book growing louder. I turned corner after corner, but the library shifted, changing aisles behind me, forcing me deeper. Finally, I burst into a wide hall. At its center, a staircase spiraled upward into a void, no ceiling visible. The shelves bent to form walls around it. I didn't hesitate. I took the stairs 2 at a time, clutching the book so hard my knuckles ached. Behind me, the man shrieked, a sound like tearing paper and breaking glass. It echoed until it was everywhere, until I couldn't tell if he was still chasing me or if the sound came from the library itself. Higher and higher I climbed until my legs burned, my chest split with pain. The staircase twisted, tightening like a corkscrew, the steps shrinking beneath my feet. I stumbled and fell hard against the railing, my book tumbling from my grasp. It slid down the steps, pages fluttering. No! I scrambled after it, terror worse than the thought of capture ripping through me. I snatched it just before it slipped into the void beyond the stairs. My chest heaved as I clutched it tight again, and then I looked up. At the top of the staircase stood the librarian. He hadn't followed. He had simply appeared, as though he had always been there. His hollow eyes glimmered. "You cannot outrun what you carry," he said. I sank onto the steps, shaking, sweat and tears blurring my vision. My body was broken from running, my mind unraveling. I wanted to throw the book into the void, to scream, to end it. But even thinking the thought made my chest tighten until I could hardly breathe. When I looked down, fresh words gleamed across the page. He thought of throwing it away. But he knew it would never let him. The librarian extended one pale hand toward me. "Climb," he said softly. "Your story has only begun." Inside, the air smelled of damp pages and candle wax. 100 shelves towered upward into shadows, stacked with books that bore no titles, only blank spines. And in the silence, from somewhere between the aisles, I heard it. A voice that was not quite a whisper, not quite a breath. Every reader must finish their book. The silence of the library pressed in tighter with every step, as if the walls themselves had shifted to close off my path back to the door. I tried, glancing over my shoulder, but what had been a simple entrance was no longer there. The doorway had melted into shadow, the faint outlines of shelves stretching into an impossible corridor where the exit should have been. My heart pounded, the sound loud in my ears, but even that seemed muffled, like the library was swallowing noise as eagerly as it did light. I forced myself forward, brushing my fingers along the spines of the nearest books. They were damp to the touch, slick as though pulled from water. Yet when I pulled one from the shelf, the pages were brittle and yellowed, flaking beneath my thumb. The cover was blank, but when I opened it, words bled onto the page in black ink that dripped like fresh blood. I blinked, horrified. The words weren't printed. They were being written as I read them. A line curved, a sentence formed, and then my name appeared. I slammed the book shut, chest heaving. But it didn't stop. Even with the cover closed, I could hear a scratching, like quills dragging furiously across parchment. I dropped it back onto the shelf and backed away, only to hear dozens more quills scratching in unison, their sound spreading like termites chewing through wood. The entire library was writing. Then came the voice again, no louder than before, no less intimate, as though it breathed against my ear. "Every reader must finish their book." I spun around. There was no one, yet I felt the undeniable certainty of being watched. Not just by one presence, but by hundreds. The books themselves stared, each spine a lidless eye. Lightning cracked somewhere beyond the ceiling, illuminating for a fraction of a second the far end of the aisle. A figure stood there, tall and skeletal, draped in robes the color of ash. Its hands were too long, the fingers stretched and crooked like roots, and in one of them it clutched a lantern that glowed with a pale bluish fire. I froze. My breath hitched, but my body refused to move. The figure raised its head slowly, and though the hood shadowed its face, I felt the weight of its gaze pierce through me. The lantern swung once, side to side, and then it began to walk toward me. Each step was deliberate, echoing far louder than it should have in the smothered air. The shelves trembled as it passed, books shivering on their ledges as if bowing to its presence. I staggered backward, heart hammering. My heel struck something solid, and I nearly toppled over a chair that hadn't been there a moment ago. A reading table stretched behind me, covered in more of the blank-spined books, each one trembling slightly as though waiting for me to open them. The figure reached the edge of the lantern's light and stopped. I could see its hands now, pale as parchment, the nails blackened and cracked. Its voice slithered out, low and rasping, but perfectly clear. You have entered the librarian's domain. You have chosen a book. I didn't choose anything, I managed to whisper, my voice raw with panic. The librarian tilted its head, and the lantern fire guttered briefly, casting twisting shadows along the walls. The moment your eyes touched the page, the binding began. The story is yours now, and you must finish it. I don't want... The words cut off in my throat as pain seared across my palm. I glanced down. A line of ink was etching itself into my skin, curling and coiling into letters I could not read. The characters pulsed as if alive, burning and spreading like veins of black fire. No! I gasped, clawing at my hand, but the ink sank deeper, disappearing beneath the flesh. My pulse thundered where the letters had vanished, every beat echoing with a rhythm that wasn't my own. The librarian's voice hissed closer, though the figure had not moved. Every story hungers. Yours has begun. To abandon it is to be consumed. The books around me trembled violently, their pages fluttering as though caught in a phantom wind. One snapped open with a sharp crack, and a scream tore from within its binding, a human voice shrill and broken. Another book fell to the floor, bursting apart as black smoke erupted from between its pages, writhing and curling like snakes. The smoke twisted upward, forming briefly into the shape of a face, hollow eyes, mouth open in endless terror, before it dissipated into the shadows above. I stumbled back, trembling so hard I nearly collapsed. What do you want from me? The librarian raised its hand, pointing one skeletal finger toward the chair at the table. Sit, read, finish what has begun. Or the story will finish you. The lantern light flared brighter, and with it, an unseen force shoved me forward. My knees buckled against the chair, and before I could resist, I was seated. The book in front of me opened on its own, pages fluttering until they stilled on a blank sheet. Slowly, words bled across the paper, forming the opening of a story. My story. The first line read, "The storm had been waiting for him," leading him to the door that should never have been opened. It was exactly what had happened. My stomach dropped. I tried to push away, but the chair's arms had warped around mine, wood twisting like vines to hold me down. The quills began their scratching again, louder this time, in perfect rhythm with my racing heart. I couldn't escape. The library had bound me. The curse had begun. Inside, the air smelled of damp pages and candle wax. 100 shelves towered upward into shadows, stacked with books that bore no titles, only blank spines. And in the silence, from somewhere between the aisles, I heard it, a voice that was not quite a whisper, not quite a breath. Every reader must finish their book, the quills scratched on, their rhythm building into something almost unbearable, like insects crawling beneath my skin. Each stroke seemed to echo inside my skull, tugging thoughts from me and spilling them onto the page. I tried to look away, but my eyes kept dragging back to the words forming in the book. They bled into existence slowly at first, then faster like veins filling with ink. He sat bound in the chair, fighting a story he could not refuse. I flinched. My breath caught in my throat. The book was writing me in real time. Everything I thought, everything I did, it already knew. No, I whispered, jerking against the twisted arms of the chair. The wood groaned but held firm, like it was part of my bones now. My hands trembled above the open book, my skin clammy with sweat. The words shifted again. He whispered his denial, but the library had already swallowed it whole. The lantern flame hissed, sputtering blue, and for a moment, I thought it would go out. The librarian stood unmoving, its hooded face angled toward me. Even in the dim light, I could see the faint shimmer of something beneath the hood. Not eyes, pages. Thin curling sheets of parchment where a face should have been. Each one flickered, as if turned by an invisible hand. What do you want from me? My voice cracked, small and raw. The librarian lifted the lantern slightly, tilting its hood so the glow spilled across the book in front of me. The flame pulsed once, twice in perfect time with my heart. Then came the voice, rasping like old parchment torn in half, to finish, to feed, to live. The words chilled me deeper than the storm outside ever had. I looked down at the book again. The lines were still writing themselves, spilling across the page with an urgency that made my pulse race faster. They were telling a story I couldn't control, my story. But it didn't just describe, it predicted. He would reach for the pen, though he swore he wouldn't. His fingers would curl around it, trembling. And the moment they touched the page, the curse would root deeper. I froze, staring at the quill lying on the table beside the book. Its tip gleamed, wet and glistening like freshly spilled ink. Or blood. I shook my head violently. No, I won't, but my hand rose anyway. My muscles spasmed, my will unraveling, as though invisible strings pulled me upward. My fingers brushed the shaft of the quill. It was warm, pulsing faintly, like something alive. The instant I gripped it, pain stabbed through my palm, a shock that jolted my body. The ink under my skin flared, burning like molten iron. I gasped, and the pen dragged itself down to the page. The first line scrawled out in jagged, frantic letters. But I knew they weren't mine. He has begun. My chest heaved. My throat choking on words I couldn't speak. The ink bled faster now, filling entire paragraphs, entire pages, as if my life was being devoured in a rush. The quill scratched furiously, my hand a puppet caught in the frenzy. I tried to pull away, but the harder I resisted, the harder the quill dug into the page, spilling more of me into the cursed story. The shelves around me trembled, books spilling from their places. Some hit the floor with a heavy, wet sound, as though they weren't made of paper at all, but something thicker, fleshier. When one cracked open beside my feet, I saw not words inside, but a human eye, wide and bloodshot, rolling in panic before sinking back into darkness. I gagged, bile rising in my throat. The librarian stepped closer. Its long fingers brushed the top of the book, and instantly, the words slowed, then stopped. The quill dropped from my hand, clattering against the wood. My palms smoked faintly where the ink had burned deepest. The hood shifted lower, and I felt the librarian lean near enough that I could smell the parchment of its breath. "You belong to the shelves now." "No, please, you will finish." The lantern flared and the room shifted. The table, the shelves, even the air bent sideways. Suddenly, I wasn't sitting in the chair anymore. I was standing in a different aisle of the library, though I had no memory of moving. The shelves towered endlessly above me, filled with the same blank-spined books. But now I noticed something else. Every shelf had gaps, empty spaces where books should have been. The nearest gap quivered, and my stomach dropped as I saw faint, ghostly outlines forming in it, the exact size of a book, its cover invisible but waiting for me. My knees buckled. I grabbed at the nearest shelf for balance, but the wood pulsed like living skin beneath my fingers. My hand recoiled in horror. From deeper within the library, I heard something stir. Not the librarian this time, something else. A dragging, shuffling sound like chains pulled across stone. A chorus of faint whispers rose up, growing louder with each heartbeat. They weren't random murmurs. They were voices reading, dozens, hundreds, each whispering lines from their own cursed books. I pressed my palms against my ears, but it didn't help. The words wormed their way in, filling my skull until I could barely hear my own thoughts. Some voices screamed. Others begged. A few muttered in broken, endless loops, reciting the same line over and over as if trapped forever. I stumbled forward, trying to escape the noise, but every step seemed to drag me deeper. My breath caught when I saw figures slumped at the ends of aisles. People, or what was left of them. Their skin was pale, stretched thin as paper, their eyes blank white. Each one clutched a book against their chest, whispering endlessly to its pages. I gagged and staggered back, but one of them lifted its head. The sound it made was not a scream, not a cry, but a hollow laugh. The sound of madness echoing through a hollow throat. My heart thundered. I turned and ran, blindly tearing down an aisle, my boots slamming against the warped floorboards. The whispers chased me, echoing louder and louder until it felt like the shelves themselves were screaming. But no matter how far I ran, the shelves didn't end. They bent and twisted, curving back on themselves. When I finally stumbled around a corner, gasping for breath, I stopped dead. I was back at the same table. The same book lay open, waiting. The librarian stood across from me. Unmoving, the lantern's flame steady now. The silence that followed was worse than the whispers. "You cannot leave unfinished," the librarian rasped. The book's pages turned themselves slowly, stopping at a blank sheet. Words bled across in steady, deliberate strokes. He thought he could run. He thought he could fight. But the library always brings its readers home. The pen lifted itself from the table, hovering just above the page, dripping black ink that hissed like acid where it landed. Slowly it turned toward me, quivering in the air, waiting for me to take it. I shook my head. My throat was raw, my voice gone, but the denial pulsed in my blood. Yet my hand twitched again. The ink inside me burned hotter, spreading through my veins, tugging me closer to the quill. The library wanted me to finish, and I was running out of choices. The quill hovered in front of me like a patient predator. Every droplet of its ink hissed when it touched the page, searing tiny black burns into the parchment. My hand twitched toward it, pulled by a force that was no longer entirely my own. The ink burned under my skin, pulsing through my veins in sharp bursts, dragging me closer. I clenched my fist, nails digging deep into my palm, but even the pain wasn't enough to hold me still. The librarian did not move. It didn't need to. Its presence pressed down on me with the weight of inevitability. The hooded head tilted ever so slightly, and the flame inside the lantern flared bright enough to cast shadows that rippled across the ceiling like waves. The book on the table shivered. Pages fluttered. Lines began to appear, scrawling themselves without my hand touching the pen. I leaned closer despite myself. He resisted, but resistance was only a prelude. The quill would always find the hand it belonged to. I stumbled back, chair screeching against the floor. But my body froze when I saw the next words bleed across the page. He turned toward the shelves, searching for escape. He found only his reflection. Slowly, I turned my head toward the towering shelves beside me. At first, I thought it was only wood and shadow. Then I saw them, dozens of faint impressions moving within the spines, faces, my face. Each book showed me at different moments, caught like photographs, eyes wide with fear, mouth open mid-breath, head turned as if fleeing. The images shifted as I watched, every expression perfectly mirroring the panic in my chest. "No," I whispered. "That's not real. That's not—" The shelf groaned, and one of the books fell forward. Its spine cracked open on the floor. I stared down at it, my stomach lurching. It wasn't filled with words. It was filled with skin, thin, curling sheets of it, pressed flat like parchment. And there, stretched across the first page, was my own face, mouth sewn shut with black thread. I staggered back, bile burning my throat. The librarian's voice rasped again, every syllable echoing in the hollow of my ribs. "Every reader finishes. One way or another." The quill darted forward like a snake plunging into my hand. The pain was blinding, a searing burn that shot through every nerve. I screamed, but the sound came out muffled, swallowed by the library itself. The quill forced itself into my grip, my fingers curling tight against my will. The book opened wider. The page was blank again, waiting. My hand slammed down, the quill scratching across the parchment. Words spilled faster than thought, carving themselves from the marrow of my bones. Each sentence pulled something from me, memories, moments, pieces of myself. I wrote about the storm, about the door, about the library. My arm trembled violently, but the words poured anyway, and then, without warning, I wrote something I hadn't lived. He would walk deeper into the aisles, where the voices of the unfinished waited to greet him. I froze, staring at the words. They weren't past tense. They weren't what had already happened. They were prophecy. The story wasn't only recording, it was guiding me. The librarian lowered the lantern, and the flame pulsed like a heartbeat. The shelves around me shifted, groaning, stretching taller. My grip on the quill loosened, and it dropped with a soft clink onto the table. The book snapped shut, the sound sharp as a coffin lid. The librarian raised one long skeletal hand and pointed toward the darkened aisle beyond the table. The air shifted. I felt something waiting there, I shook my head. No, I'm not going in there. The lantern flared, and the shelves to either side of me shrieked as if dragged across stone. The only path left was forward, toward the aisle the words had foretold. Every step echoed. My boots thudded against warped planks that creaked like bones snapping. The air grew colder, denser, every breath frosting in front of my face. The whispers grew louder, swelling into a desperate chorus. When I turned the corner, I saw them. Readers. Dozens of them slumped against the shelves, each with a book clutched to their chest. Their lips moved ceaselessly, whispering passages I couldn't hear clearly. Some rocked back and forth, their eyes hollow. Others sat perfectly still, lips twitching, as if the act of reading had emptied them out long ago. One of them looked up as I passed. Her face was pale, stretched too thin, veins crawling beneath the skin like ink lines. Her eyes fixed on me wide and wet, and when she spoke, her voice rasped like torn paper. Finish it. Please, finish it for me. She shoved the book toward me, arms trembling violently. I caught a glimpse of its cover. Stitched leather, pulsing faintly as though it had a heartbeat. Her fingers clung to it with a desperate strength. Take it! She screamed, her voice breaking into sobs. Take it away before it eats me whole. I stumbled back, heart hammering. The other readers began to stir, their whispers rising, merging into an awful chant. Dozens of books thrust toward me, trembling hands extending them from every shadow. Pages fluttered. Voices cried, Read mine! Finish mine! Set me free! The shelves trembled as the chant grew louder. Pages tore themselves free and swirled into the air like a storm of paper, cutting my skin as they passed. Each one bore sentences in 100 different hands, all unfinished, all clawing toward me. I dropped to my knees, covering my head, but the books kept pressing forward. A child's voice shrieked from one, a man's laugh spilled brokenly from another, and somewhere in the chaos I heard my own voice calling, begging. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying it was illusion, and then silence. I opened my eyes slowly. The aisle was empty. The readers were gone. The books were gone. Even the shelves looked bare, stripped clean, except for one book, lying open at my feet. I bent down, breath shallow, and read the words written across its page. He would pick it up. Though every part of him screamed not to, my hand trembled, but still it reached. The book at my feet pulsed faintly like a heart beating beneath its leather skin. I didn't want to touch it. Every instinct in me screamed to turn and run, but my fingers stretched anyway, pulled by something deeper than fear. When I finally lifted it, the air seemed to shudder, as though the entire library had been holding its breath. The pages fluttered on their own, stopping halfway through. Words spilled across the parchment, wet and black, but this time I didn't need to read them aloud. They carved straight into my mind. The story ends where the shelf begins. He will take his place and the curse will be complete. My chest tightened. I spun around, searching for the librarian, but the aisle behind me was empty. No lantern, no figure. Only silence. Then I saw it, the gap in the shelf. The same one I had noticed before. Empty. Waiting. The book trembled violently in my hands as if desperate to leap into that space. I staggered backward, clutching it to my chest like a shield. My breath came in ragged gasps. No, I whispered. I won't let you. The ink under my skin burned hotter, racing through my veins until every heartbeat echoed like a hammer. My vision blurred, spots of black dancing in front of me. The book grew heavier, dragging my arms down until I dropped to my knees. From the shadows, the librarian emerged. It moved slowly, inexorably, lantern swinging. The hood tilted toward the gap in the shelf, then back toward me. You were chosen, it rasped. You must finish, I screamed and hurled the book onto the floor. It burst open, pages tearing free, whirling into the air in a storm of ink and parchment. The shelves shook violently, dust pouring down. The lantern's flame flared white, blinding, and then silence again. When I blinked, the book was gone. The gap in the shelf was no longer empty. A spine had appeared, blank and pale, pressed neatly between the others. I stumbled forward in horror. My trembling hand brushed it. The leather was warm, too warm. I pulled back, heart pounding, when I saw the faintest shadow of letters bleeding across the spine. Not a title. A name. My name. The lantern hissed, and the librarian leaned close, parchment face whispering with the turn of invisible pages. "It is finished." My vision collapsed into black. When I opened my eyes, I was sitting at the table again. The storm outside was gone. The silence was absolute. My book lay open in front of me, its final line written clean and sharp across the page. He became one of the librarian's collection, and his story would never be read again. I reached for the words, but my fingers passed through them like smoke. My hands were translucent, the ink beneath my skin shining faintly as it spread across my body. The shelves creaked. The whispers began again, rising and falling in endless rhythm. I turned my head and saw them, the other readers, slumped and hollow, clutching their books. Only now I understood. They weren't prisoners. They were pages. The librarian raised the lantern one final time, the blue flame flickering against its hood. Its voice carried through the endless aisles, soft and final. Every reader must finish their book. And then the light went out. The library swallowed me whole.